Welcome to Freedom to Learn, the podcast that champions choice in education, defends parental rights, and exposes the harm caused by school unions. I'm Jenny Gentles, Director of Education Freedom and Parental Rights at DFI, the Defense of Freedom Institute in Washington, D.C. In today's episode, we continue our series on the recently passed federal scholarship tax credit. This provision in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act provides a dollar-for-dollar tax credit for individual taxpayers who donate up to $1,700 annually to scholarship-granting organizations, which then give money to students to cover tuition and other K-12 education expenses. Rabbi A.D. Motzen joins the podcast to explain the impact of this historic legislation and the journey that it took to become law. Rabbi Motzen is the National Director of Government Affairs at Agudath Israel of America, a national grassroots organization founded in 1922 that serves and supports the Orthodox Jewish community in the United States. Rabbi Motzen and his colleagues have been steadfast and highly effective advocates for expanding school choice at the state and now national levels. Stick around to hear his response to a pervasive school choice myth. Rabbi A.D. Motzen, welcome to Freedom to Learn.
Good to see you, Jenny. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to be talking with you today. We're having a mini-series on the Freedom to Learn podcast about the recently passed federal scholarship tax credit. And I'm curious as to what you're calling it. It's had different names throughout the last few months and years. And I'd love to hear your elevator pitch. How do you describe what this is?
So as far as what I call it, I beg that they create a better name. When the House and Senate took away the ECCA, which was hard enough as it is because there was ECA or ECCA. It's the Federal Scholarship Tax Credit. That's the only way to describe it. Sorry.
I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure we're all calling it the same thing so everybody knows what we're talking about. And then you were on Capitol Hill for an incredible amount of time. Like you really put in a lot of work making sure people knew what this was and knew why it was needed. So I'm sure you do have that elevator pitch honed. How do you describe this succinctly?
When I say you say I was on the Hill. I was with our Agudath Israel team, both in Washington as well as we have state offices around the country, and they worked with their members of Congress on the ground as well. So now that it passed, and we're going to talk later exactly how it did so and what it says. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, from the New York Times saying it's a national voucher. So I think the best way to explain it is what it does. If you're a parent who is struggling to pay tuition to have your child go to the private school of your choice, this is going to help. If you are a parent considering to send your child to private school, but you're just not sure you have enough monthly income to pay tuition bills, this will help you. If you are a parent who sends their child to public school, but your child needs extra services, special needs services, tutoring, transportation to get there, and for whatever reason is not covered to the school, public charter school of your choice, well, this new law can help, and potentially in all 50 states. That's what it does.
Okay, you described it in a press release after President Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act on July 4th. As you said, by signing this historic tax credit into law, President Trump brought the country one step closer to his stated goal of universal school choice. The new federal scholarship tax credit will allow taxpayers in all 50 states to generate K-12 scholarships that empower parents and students. Your elevator pitch focused on those parents and students, which is what we do in the school choice movement, in the education reform movement. That's what we're about. Mechanically, how does the tax credit allow taxpayers to generate the scholarships?
Excellent, right? So a lot of people start with the mechanics and they start talking about tax credits.
Yeah.
What we have found talking to people in general, smart people, lawyers, at the minute you say the word tax, their brain shuts off. So Everything that you said afterwards did not register.
Yeah.
So while some people start describing it as a tax credit and explaining how tax credit works, I explain what it's supposed to do and then go backwards and say, okay, how does the money get generated? Well, unlike the New York Times, it's actually not a voucher. It's not a check to a parent or to a school. The money is generated in these nonprofit scholarship organizations, which is not a new concept. Over 20 states already have such scholarship granting organizations. For the rest of the call, we'll call them SGOs because it's shorter. Agudath Israel of America happens to be not just an advocate, but we actually operate an SGO in Missouri. Today, the day we're recording, the governor of Missouri signed a bill. We now have a copy with a pen because we were at the bill signing, and expanded scholarships in that state, $50 million scholarships through their scholarship organization. So we're very familiar with the entity of a scholarship organization. For the mechanics, though, for the average person at home who's not running a scholarship organization, it has to do with every single tax-paying American can now donate $1,700 per taxpayer to a pot of money that will help the parents I mentioned earlier. That's how it operates. $1,700 every taxpayer, and that generates hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars, hopefully, for children to use in one of the eligible expenses. I think once you start talking about details, they start losing people, but I think we keep to that big level and not talk about taxes too much. The one thing is important, because everyone asks, well, I already can give a donation to a nonprofit today. So what's the difference?
Mm-hmm.
The difference is a credit is a lot more valuable than a deduction. Without getting into tax law, if I make a donation, for some people, it's just reducing the amount of money that the government says I earned that year that I'm taxed on. So if I give $1,000 to an organization right now, depending on who you are, you may not get anything back. And at most, you might get a few $100s back. If you make a donation and get a tax credit, I make $1,000 donation, I get $1,000 back. It doesn't cost me anything. So the simple choice parents have, or not parents, that's nothing to do with parents, donors have. You want to support kids in your community. You want to give $1,000 and not cost you anything. You can give it to Uncle Sam, or you can give it to kids in your neighborhood. You choose. Uncle Sam, kids in your neighborhood, that's the choice. If you like that choice, give $1,700 to scholarship organizations and benefit parents.
You can give more than $1,700, but you can get the federal tax credit for that $1,700 contribution
right.
to
And
the
to clarify,
scholarship
the
organization.
scholarship amounts, that's all will be pooled together. So the scholarship organization can give scholarships of $5,000 or $10,000 if they have enough donors. The more donors, the larger the scholarships, are more meaningful, or the more kids that scholarship organization can serve.
Okay. So as you mentioned, this is not a new idea. This is something that's in place at the state level in close to 20 states, and scholarship granting organizations exist, sometimes on a very large scale. When you're talking about Step Up for Students in Florida, which has been running the scholarship programs there for a long time, and then sometimes on a smaller scale in a state where I live, Virginia, the scholarship granting organizations are very small and very focused. And this idea of doing it at the federal level is not a new idea. It was called Education Freedom Scholarships during President Trump's first administration. We've mentioned Educational Choice for Children Act, ECCA, which is a more recent iteration, and then it has morphed into what passed in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And your organization has been advocating for this concept for a long, long time. Can you tell us a little bit about why?
So just to point out how long, so this recent effort's maybe about a dozen years. I pulled up the congressional records, the House Ways and Means Committee from 1972. That is before I was born. The late president of Agudath Israel of America was also the president of a national coalition representing all the non-public schools in the country, Catholic, Christian, Jewish, and he was testifying for a tuition tax credit, which is different than this, but it was similar concept using the federal tax code to help parents. And it was fascinating because the tuition there, he was talking about Catholic school tuition had just gone up to about $200 a year. So
Nice.
we go back, way back in this movement. But the last 12 years, yes, we've been doing this for a long time. And that's the reason I'll go back to the comments made in the 1970s. He talked about there's a concept of freedom and freedom of education and freedom of choice to practicing your religion, or whether it's religious or not, just simply having parents choose the education of their choice. But he said it's not a choice if we force them because of the pocketbook coercion and send them to public schools because they can't afford another choice. So the choice is only hypothetical unless we give them the ability to afford that choice. What he said then still rings true 50 years later. If we mean what we say about choice, we have to give people the ability to afford that. Many states do that. For the first time, the federal government is now giving parents more choice.
I just want to acknowledge what you said, that it wasn't just you on Capitol Hill. It was a broader team from Agudath Israel, and business leaders from around the country. I've had the honor of attending an event when many people were in town, and you all made it a priority when these business leaders came into town to spread out across Capitol Hill and make sure that offices knew that this federal scholarship tax credit was something that you wanted to see happen. How did that come about?
So we've been working with Coalition, many members. You were part of that for many years, working on this. And as it got closer to reconciliation, we realized that we needed to communicate to the members of Congress that their constituents found this to be the most important issue. And I think nothing hit that nothing made get that message across as powerfully as we had business leaders who just that very day, a few blocks away at the White House, were being affected by tariffs because their businesses that they're involved in would be affected by tariffs, or others that are in healthcare business, and maybe the Medicaid discussion on Capitol Hill would affect their businesses. And yet they walked into office after office with senators, House members, and the only thing they talked about was about helping children, not their own children, because thank God most of these people can afford that choice,
Right.
but people who can't afford that choice. And that resonated so much that months later, we were walking the halls, members of Congress, Speaker of the House, senators still talked about that group of people who, together with what was being done with coalition partners, with other faith leaders, but it made such an impression that they came on that day for one reason. And I think that's part of that strong coalition was why we actually got something in this bill.
Well, with all that's going on in the world, and then with all that's going on with domestic and fiscal policy, it was really impressive that this issue was made the priority. And Agudath Israel is not alone among faith-based organizations in prioritizing the passage of this federal scholarship tax credit. You mentioned the broader coalition that you're part of. Could you share a little bit about that coalition and what you've heard from the perspective of other faith-based organizations?
So yeah, so it is very important that we don't. It's not a Jewish or Catholic issue. In fact, the fact that one person who works for the Catholic Conference, one of the senators asked, every time I see you, you're with the yarmulkes, right? The guys with the yarmulkes. It made an impression that we were together and unified, and we walked into offices together, or with John Schilling, your guest from last time, with American Federation for Children, representing also broad number of people. We came together with the CAPE board. We're the Council of American Private Education. Agudath Israel is a longtime board member, and we came together. So here you are, Catholic, Christian, Jewish, Muslim school leaders unified, saying this is our priority. It doesn't mean we don't have other issues, but we're coming to you together. And while we might come to the table for different reasons or have different angles, but on this, I think we were pretty lockstep together that this is what we wanted, and trying to get the best bill possible that would protect the integrity of and freedom of our private school, and the freedom of the parents who want to choose such a education for their child if it's right for them.
You mentioned CAPE, Council for American Private Education, and folks should know that that organization is out there and very active, under the radar, but very active in Washington, D.C., and always very effective at ensuring that the private school perspective, the perspective of private school administrators, but also the families who attend private schools, are represented in front of the administration and Congress. So there's a lot of talk of, oh, and this was not talk from supporters, this was talk from opponents. Well, this is going to lead to the regulation of private schools. My guess is that CAPE would not be for this if there was a big concern about a regulatory regime about to descend upon private schools.
Yeah, we that's 100% true, and obviously we fought and the original bill had maybe more explicit provisions that clarified that this bill does not give anybody any more power than they had yesterday to regulate private schools in many ways. And while that in the end was, we'll talk, I'm sure, about the Parliamentarian and her opinion, and that was removed. as extraneous to reconciliation. But I think that what we found very important is the legislative intent and the congressional intent that was there. And even if at one point it was almost taken out, put right back, because I think Congress, especially Republican Congress, understands that this is about parents and not about regulating schools. And that's what really we found across the country, where there are many school choice programs, and by and large, they protect the integrity of religious schools, because this is not about schools. It's about parents receiving the funds to choose. And if it works for them, that's what's important. But we will make sure, and we will stay vigilant both in the rules process as well as if they're ready for litigation if necessary, to protect our schools. And I can definitely say that on behalf of the entire CAPE coalition, that is something that we have not backed down on at all.
A topic for another day and another podcast episode, but ever since there was an Elementary and Secondary Education Act, private school students, private schools have had some kind of formal relationship with federal law, with federal education policy. Again, there are organizations like CAPE, organizations like yours, and the Catholic bishops that keep an eye on things, because this is something that has to be carefully managed, so you don't just turn private schools into public schools. Otherwise, what is the choice that you're offering family? And when you're talking about ensuring that religious freedom and faith-based schools are protected, as is their right, things have to be handled and monitored carefully. Before we get to the Senate parliamentarian, which unfortunately we do need to talk about her, a senator from Hawaii proposed an amendment to remove the provision during the Senate debate. So it made it through the House. It was kind of a messy process, made it through the House and the House reconciliation bill, went over to the Senate, popped up in the Senate bill. And then they had that overnight vote-a-rama thing, whatever they call that. Did you keep an eye on what happened there?
I was up. Several of us were texting and commenting the next morning. I did fall asleep at my laptop, I will admit, but I was up. And I did hear Ted Cruz get up and give a resounding response to that, of that it is the civil rights issue, school choice, the civil rights issue of the 21st century, something he has said many times, talked about every child, regardless of race, income, deserves to have ability to go have an excellent education or access to that. And this bill will unleash billions of dollars. At the end, it was a tight vote. And I think all that did was prove why this needed to go to reconciliation and couldn't be passed as a standalone bill, because still half the Senate would refuse to allow parents the ability to improve their child's education the way they see fit. And now we have names. Now we have a vote to show that why it was so important that it needed to be in this bill.
Okay, so Senator Ted Cruz to the rescue in the middle of the night and spoke up, and that amendment was struck down. So we ended up with the provision in the Senate bill, not the provision that maybe people would call ideal, and that's where the Senate parliamentarian comes in. So talk a little bit about what happened with the parliamentarian. John and I talked about this, and I think it's worth going over again so people understand a little bit more about how the sausage is made and why we ended up with what we did. And then talk a little bit about why she's so influential. I think everybody's kind of scratching their head on that one still.
Right. So I think people need to, like, perspective. I think she is the number six, since the 1930s. There have been six parliamentarians, I believe. You'd have to, fact check me. It's a job people generally have. It's almost like you may actually have served longer than being in the U.S. Supreme Court. So it's the umpire, and on a day-to-day basis, it's really not controversial. Senate has rules. She's supposed to make sure they follow them. But when it comes to reconciliation, because she's the judge calling balls and strikes, she's the one who determines the size of her strike zone. And what can I say? This parliamentarian definitely this wasn't just on school choice. There were a lot of policies that the Republicans, a lot of smart lawyers, chairmen of committees, lots of staff reviewed. Everybody thought it was in order, obviously, and then got thrown out or had to be revised. So we weren't unique. We were just last. If you follow the timeline, the last almost the last piece of legislation she reviewed on Thursday was this Educational Choice for Children Act provision. And she said it was out of order.
And so she doesn't go in with a red pen and strike it out, and that's the end of it. She makes this recommendation that the Senate committees then have to take action on and scramble to find something that might be okay when it comes to the bird rule and what she's trying to enforce.
Yeah, so this archaic bird rule named after Senator Byrd, but is and is has some principles, but defining it is in her purview to decide how she sees it. But yeah, in some cases they throw it out, and she says it's out of order, and they just move on. In this case, the risk really was that it was a Friday morning. They were planning to vote on the bill, ideally Friday, even Saturday, and all of a sudden this thing's thrown out. There's not enough time to revise it.
Oh.
They have a lot of other needs they now to figure out. Medicaid and SALT; those were the topics everyone was talking about in the news, not this one little piece of it. For us, that might have been the most important. And what we were scrambling, all the advocates, the senators who were our champions, was how do we make sure that the Senate just doesn't move on and say, okay, sorry, we ran out of time. We got to move. We got to vote. So better luck next time. And I think that's where we saw Senator Cruz as our champion say, I'm going to argue with her. I'm not taking just no for an answer. I want to know why. And Senate leadership gave him that the room to do that. Because if they would have said, just not enough time, we got to move on, the best advocate doesn't have a day in court, it doesn't help. And what ended up happening over many meetings between that Friday and Monday morning, when you saw a new amendment suddenly appear at the last moment, was Senator Cruz going back and forth with his staff, with Senator Thune's staff, with leadership saying, okay, I get it, you don't like it. What don't you like? What will make you happy and fit the rules? And that's what we're going to do now, because we want to, because you're demanding it. Otherwise, you're throwing the whole thing out.
So we got what we got at the end
Yeah.
of that process. We're grateful to Senator Cruz. Well, I won't speak for for other groups, but the impression that I'm getting from advocates is that people are grateful to Senator Cruz for both of those battles, for working it out with the parliamentarian, with working with leadership to ensure he had the time to do that, and for fighting off that middle of the night amendment. And he wasn't alone in advocating for this provision by any stretch of the imagination, but definitely there at the end. But again, I'm not hearing that people are totally content with the current version of it. Although this is a historic step forward with school choice. What do you think needs to happen legislatively and with regulations to make the most of what did pass?
So the first thing is it starts in 2027. So for everybody worried about what's going to happen tomorrow, it's not starting. You can't donate $1 until January 2027. But a lot of work has to be done until then. And the first thing is rules, regulations. That's what Treasury does. And they might not do it right away, but we're working on that. And having a team of experts to make sure that they interpret the law, which is very often vague on a number of issues. We want it to be obviously as intended to work. And since it was a last minute, a lot of things were stripped out. We could see congressional intent, but the language that was there before may not be there now because of a reconciliation issue. So whatever clarifications we need to make with Treasury to make it workable, we have a team of experts. When I say we, not talking myself, Coalition, American Federation of Children, John, others that have, Jim Blue, your co-founder of DFI, where have a lot of experience around the country to say, hey, this is what's needed to make it work. How do we fit that with what the rules and what they say? And then there's going to be an aspect of this, what's being called the opt-in, where a governor needs to submit a list of approved SGOs, scholarship organizations, by the beginning of the year. So scholarship organizations need guidance of what that means and how do I apply and who's making that decision. Is it the governor? Is it somebody else? And what kind of leeway do they have? So there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of discussions. I would say that there's still time between now and 2027. Congress can come back and clarify things. They can change things. Another bill And and the other thing is that on the state level, we are going to continue educating not just governors, but everybody in the state. Really, my opening words. This is not about a New York Times false headline that this is a national voucher scam or national voucher program. It is about helping almost all parents who are eligible. We didn't talk about income eligibility, but it's very high. In many places, parents making $300,000, $400,000 are still able to have their children benefit. That doesn't mean the scholarship organization will give it to them at that level, but it means that it incorporates most of this country can benefit. And I think once governors, whoever's in charge of that state's decision making, will say, "Hey, this helps. It's not state money that I'm losing to or using. If I don't opt in, the money is going to be used outside of the state. State money will flow out." So we're hoping that everybody understands and we educate everybody how important this is, how much it's going to help everybody, and then between now and 2027, all 50 states and families in all those 50 states will benefit.
And there is that potential because we talked about the $1,700 tax credit for the individual who gives to the scholarship granting organization. But overall, the volume cap isn't limited. So if there are millions of people out there who want to contribute, then that does provide that opportunity to more students
Absolutely. And
across the
it's
country.
permanent, which is something the Senate did, which is so important. We don't have to come back to Congress in 2 years unless we're trying to make it better, which we will. It is unlimited in the sense, like you said, that you just as many $1,700 donations as you can get from as many taxpayers, you have more money to help children. And I think once we educate everybody, they will all be motivated. It doesn't cost them. It's Uncle Sam or your local child who needs help.
Well, AD, you've been on the Hill for a long time. You've been at the state level, hearing all the stuff that's said at the state legislatures as well. So I'm sure you've heard a lot of school choice myths. You've heard a lot of opponents say their piece about these proposals. I'm wondering if you had the opportunity to speak directly to, say, AFT President Randy Weingarten or NEA President Becky Pringle or whoever your favorite school choice opponent is, what would you say to them about this proposal?
Stop lying.
Yeah.
It's not a binary choice between private school parents and public school parents as if there's a different creature. Parents want what's best for their child. I've been in the room with a parent who has a child in a private school, a public school, and a charter school. How they identify as all three at the same time, and I think as this bill surely makes that clear that this is about helping parents. And I think if everybody beyond the unions, I think I'm not trying to convince the unions. They are representing the adults. That's their job. That's what they get paid to do. But I think everybody else who cares about children primarily and represents children should be focused on what does the bill actually do. Let's read it. Let's not rely on a quote from Randy Weingarten. Let's actually read it and find out, oh, this helps everybody. That's what I would do. Talk beyond them, ignore them, and actually tell the truth.
All right, but those guys are actually knocking on doors on Capitol Hill. They're holding press conferences. They're sending out press releases, and they're very active on social media with their school choice myths. So, what's the one that you heard the most over the last few months, or what's the one that bothers you the most that you'd want to tackle today?
Well, right now they're talking about that this bill, this new law, will help billionaires. Well, as we said before, I'm a billionaire. I have $1,700, and I made a donation to a scholarship organization. I actually have the same amount of money as I would have had yesterday because I either gave it to Uncle Sam or a scholarship organization. So that didn't benefit the billionaire. Who benefited from all the billionaires and all the millionaires and all the people, working class people who gave $1,700 and pulled it together to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars for scholarships? I can tell you benefited. Parents, primarily the ones who struggle the most. So that is, again, lying. And I think it annoys me because it's just blatantly and patently false.
They kind of throw the whole billionaire, millionaire, wealthy people thing like at the wall as much as possible to see what will stick. So it's either they're criticizing billionaires for getting the tax cut or wealthy people for benefiting for sending their kids to private school. And no, back it back it way up. What is this? This is expanding educational opportunities for family who might need like just a little extra financial bump. This is not for billionaires or millionaires who can easily send their children to private school. They don't need a scholarship to do that and won't be going through the administrative hassle of applying for one.
I can speak for
So
the schools. I've sent my kids to private. I went to private school on scholarship. My kids have gone to school on scholarship, and I can tell you that in some schools, our school I send my kids to, I think the free and reduced lunch rate might be about 50%, maybe more. There are schools in our network, and we don't operate schools, but closer to 80-90%. So I'd love to know where the billionaires and millionaires are, but they're not sending, at least not enough of them are sending to our schools. That's why parents need these scholarships.
yeah. All right. So how can people learn more about the federal scholarship tax credit? How can they keep up with what's going to be emerging through the regulatory process?
So I'm sure many, if you have faith-based groups or others, there might be a lot of others sending out information. I can tell you for our organization, agudah.org, agudah.org/school choice. There's a lot of information. It goes through all our webinars, our information, which keeps getting updated throughout the last few months, especially. American Federation for Children has a great page where it has just a focus on the national and school choice effort, and they have the bill text. It's important to read it because, as I said, a lot of people aren't doing that. Has some of the summaries, has the supporters. You want to know who to thank, who co-sponsored the bill. It has all that information, and I'm sure they will add more information. And again, there are other partners. I'm sure they'll have it on theirs as well.
Well, A.D., thank you for your commitment to education freedom at the state and federal level, and thank you for joining Freedom to Learn.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for having me.
Freedom to Learn is a production of the Defense of Freedom Institute. You can learn more about DFI at dfipolicy.org. If you have feedback or suggestions for future podcasts, please reach out to us at podcast@dfipolicy.org. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a rating and review wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.